tonight, what we're really going to do is look at that 10,000-foot view. What are those common characteristics, and what are those things that grants can do for you? So you see in the overview that there's a series of definable stages in the grant writing process, and for each one of these I have particular strategies to share. And we're going to do all of those, but tonight I really want to take a look at a couple of key points. And the first is it even worth it? What can grants do for you in your organization? Well, first and foremost, the thing that grants do, what they're supposed to do, is to help you to address a specific need. Matter of fact, you're going to hear me say this many times, but your need and your ability to identify, quantify, and communicate that need is the most important stage of the entire grant writing process. And think about it this way. If you can't convince your reviewer that you have a true need that needs to be solved, a true pain that needs to be addressed, then really there's no reason to receive funds. If you don't have a real reason for the funds, then there's no reason to get funds. So the first thing and the most important thing that grants do is to help you solve a clear and significant need. But there are other things that grants can also be used for. For example, in many cases, grant funds are used to initiate new programs, a new service that will be designed, a new product that will be developed and distributed, something that doesn't currently exist but that needs to exist in order to solve the need that you identify. So grant funds are very good for that type of purpose. Grant funds can also be used to lead to future revenue, which means they can be used to develop a new service or new product, which eventually you can receive revenue for. Now we see this a lot with like Department of Commerce grants and a couple of other places that are really looking at economic development. They're looking at helping new businesses start up or helping existing businesses branch out into a new area. So in that particular case, what we're saying is that there's a need for some type of product or service. You have an idea of what that should look like and how to go about creating it and deploying it, but you need that seed funding to help you do so. So grants are very good for that. The last thing that grants can do, although it's risky, is they can help address critical shortfalls for funding, or shortfalls for critical funding. So let's say, for example, your organization provides some kind of social services to members of your community, and you have all these people that you're serving and you have all these things that you do for them, but you're running a little short of cash. You can apply for grant funds to help you address that funding shortfall. Now the reason why I say it's risky is an astute reviewer may look at your proposal and say, this person needs, a couple $100,000 or something. But they haven't already proven that they can manage the funds that they have. So why should I give them more? Well, it can be done, and you can make the case for that. And we'll talk about some situations in which that might be possible. But overall, it's kind of a risky strategy. If we were going to say, what is the one thing that you have to do, and one thing that grants are for? Again, it takes us back to that need, a clear, definable, quantifiable, significant need for funding. And if we can do that, everything else suddenly starts to make sense. Now, if we look at winning grants overall, if we look at what grants succeed, there's really just a small set of characteristics. So, for example, when I was a reviewer of federal grants, there were specific things that we were told to look for. And when I was issuing grant funds for the state, and I would bring in people who were going to be the reviewers and training them how to provide an effective review, I also told them to look for certain characteristics. And when I would train organizations on developing proposals, I would tell them these are the things you have to address, because these are the characteristics that all successful grant proposals have in common. So let's take a moment and walk through these. Well, first and foremost, as you see, is this issue right here, clear and significant need. That absolutely has to be in place, or nothing else even matters. And we've just talked about that for a moment. So let's take a look at the next one, which is that your proposal, or what you are proposing to do, has a clear connection to the purpose for those funds. What does the funder, the funding agency, intend to accomplish? Now, let's say, for example, the funds are specifically designated for economic development, or they are specifically designated to help improve literacy outcomes among students in low socioeconomic communities. And then you come to me with a proposal that says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to design this new product that will help homeowners to keep their property safe in crime areas, high crime areas. Well, it's kind of a stretch, if we're talking about literacy and you're talking about home safety, or I'm talking about economic development and you're talking about home safety. While home safety might be important, it doesn't clearly connect with the intended use of those funds, and you're probably not going to get awarded. But on the other hand, if you can determine what those purposes are, the funder's intent for those funds are, and you demonstrate a need relative to that purpose, and you propose a plan that will fit with the funder's intentions, then suddenly you have a much better chance of succeeding with your grant proposal. So that's the second one. So that one talks about aligning your purpose to the funder's purpose. But the next one is more internal. This is aligning your purpose with what your organization also does. The types of things that you're proposing, the types of need you're proposing to address, are they what you already do? Is that what your organization is involved in, or is it something completely separate? And the issue here is twofold. The first is, if your organization is not already involved in the types of things you're proposing, then it's going to look to me, the reviewer, that you're basically just looking for some ways to increase your cash flow in your organization. You're just asking for money just because you want money, not because you have a true commitment to the purpose for those funds or the need you're trying to address. So that's one problem. But the other problem is, if it is not something that you already do, then what is your credibility? Do you already have experience? What is your level of competency? If these are not the types of issues that you're already involved in, then how do I know that you are competent to implementing the plan that you propose? So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. So that really does take us back to the need statement. Is the need that you have identified a need that your organization already is involved in addressing in some way? And now you need a new service, you need a new program, you need a new project, you have a new approach to do something different to help address that need, or to expand the types of services that you already have in place. It has to fit what you already do to give me, the reviewer, the confidence that you are competent to do what you're proposing to do. So those two words often go together, competence and confidence. If you can demonstrate your competence, then I will have confidence that you can use these funds well, right? Because think about funding agencies. They receive many proposals. In some cases, depending on the funding source, potentially hundreds of proposals for a single funding source. So I've got to pick the ones that have the strongest, most definable need, the ones that have the best plan to address those needs, and in whom I can have the most confidence that those needs will actually be addressed. So we're really looking at my confidence as the reviewer and your competence as the organization to address those needs. Now, the next thing that we see that are shared by all successful grant proposals is they're able to demonstrate that the leadership of the organization is firmly committed to the implementation of the plan. If it's not, then there could be barriers to implementation. There are going to be roadblocks to accomplishing the activities that you're proposing to do. If there is, on the other hand, strong leadership support, then I know that you're going to have the organizational resources and facilities and finances and people necessary in order to do what it is that you're proposing to do and to solve the need that you have identified. So that firm leadership support is very important. Now, there's another side to this also. One of the things that we're going to talk about later is the issue of partners. Who are your partners in this proposal? Who are the other organizations that will be assisting in the implementation of this plan? So we'll talk about how to find the right partners later, but we also want to demonstrate that the leadership of those organizations also is firmly committed to supporting this plan. So it's both of those, both your internal leadership and also the leadership of your partnering organizations. The final piece having to do with your organization has to do with your capacity. Do you have the facilities necessary and the office space and the technology, the computers and so forth? Do you have the necessary people with the necessary credentials and competencies to implement the plan? And frankly, if you receive an infusion of dollars, you receive grant funds, can you manage those funds? Right? Do you have a history established that shows you know how to track, monitor, and deploy the funding that you receive in a manner that makes strong financial sense? One of the things that many small organizations and some medium-sized organizations struggle with when they receive grant funds is they kind of don't know what to do with it, right? It's like, wow, we've got all this money. How do you go about spending it and tracking it and monitoring it? Because you're going to have to account for the use of every one of those dollars. Because there's going to be reports, there's going to be audits, there's going to be reviews from the funder to say, how are you doing? And what are you doing? And one of the key things they're going to ask is, where's the money? And is it being used effectively? And is it being used appropriately based on the purposes that you initially proposed? So you have to have the financial capacity. So, for example, this $10.8 million grant, that's a pretty good sized grant for a small organization. And one of the issues that we had to address very specifically is, look, we have the capacity and the capability of managing this many dollars of this size award. The money will be well spent, it will be well tracked, we'll be able to account for it. So that's one of those things that you also have to assure the reviewers. Now, let's look at some of the issues around the specific plan itself. So we've looked at addressing the funding organization's needs. What are they looking for? We've addressed issues around your organization as a whole, but now let's look at some issues around the actual proposal. And of course, a characteristic of a winning proposal is that it has a strong plan. If you have convinced the reviewers that you have a real need, the reviewer is going to ask, okay, what are you going to do about it? Do you have a practical plan? Do you know what you need to do in order to solve that problem? Are you doing enough, and are you doing the right things to solve that plan? Is there some way that the entire proposal is basically gives you one single cohesive approach to solving that problem? And in addition to that, why do you think that you have the right approach? What is the evidence that says what you're proposing to do is in fact the right thing to do? So when we talk about a strong plan, we're not just talking about, having a lot of activities and a lot of energy that you're going to put into this, but also, are you doing the right things? And how do you know that they are the right things? So along with that then comes the evaluation plan. Think about what an evaluation plan is, any evaluation plan. It's based on, you have a clear goal which is related to the need, but it's ultimately based around the objectives that you define. And when I talk about objectives, what I mean here is what's going to change as a result of your plan. You get the money, you do a bunch of stuff, what's going to be different? What will it look like when your plan is over, when your project is over? What's changed? What's different? And how do you know? Do you have clear and appropriate processes to be able to identify that you're making progress towards the necessary changes, and clear and appropriate processes and tools in place to know whether or not you have in fact accomplished your objectives, met your goal, and solved the need that you defined? So you see, it all hangs together in that evaluation plan. It's a key piece because the reviewer is going to say, what's going to be different? You got a problem, you got some stuff, what's going to change? And it's your evaluation plan that helps to define what's going to change and how will you know that it's changed. The next thing that we see in all successful proposals is that they have a sufficient and necessary budget. Matter of fact, whenever you hear me talk about budgets, you're going to hear me say those two words, sufficient and necessary. Sufficient means, are you asking for enough money? You're going to do a lot of things. Is it enough money to do the things you propose? Is it a sufficient amount of money to significantly address the needs that you have identified? Are you asking for enough? One of the things that I often counsel folks is, look, if you need a certain amount of money, ask for the amount that you need, right? Don't shortchange yourself, because if you shortchange yourself, chances are you can't do all the stuff that's necessary, and you don't end up addressing the need. Now, in many cases, funding organizations will put a cap, they'll put a ceiling and say, funding proposals cannot exceed a certain amount. You know, $400,000 per year or $500,000 per year or something, something like that. You can't go over a certain amount, which means you have to go back and really look very carefully at what it is that you're proposing to do. Because if you try to shortchange, the personnel costs and supply costs and material and travel and so forth, if you shortchange it and go on the cheap, there's a risk that you won't be able to do what's necessary. So we have to be able to balance very carefully what it is that you're proposing to do and how much money it actually requires to do that. And obviously we'll talk about that quite a bit more, but that's the general principle. Now, the second part is necessary budget. Necessary means, yes, you have a true need for every dollar that you're asking for. You actually can say, I need this many dollars because this is how much it's going to take. You can justify your entire funding request. Projects are going to be audited, and you can just count on that. Somebody's going to look at what you're spending and how much you're spending and what you're spending it on. And they want to know that really, think about any funding agency. They want to know, are they getting the best outcomes for the dollars that they give you or that they give to somebody else in some cases. So you have to be able to justify why the amount of money is sufficient and why that amount of money is actually necessary. Because think about it. If you ask for $500,000, but I think, you can do your entire project for $400,000, and I can take that extra $100,000 and give it to somebody else, well, suddenly I can do a lot more with the money that I'm giving away. You have to be able to convince me that you actually need every dollar that you're asking for, that is the necessary amount to implement your plan, achieve your objectives, and solve the need that you have identified. Now, the last thing is actually very interesting to me, the sustainability plan. If we look back enough years, one of the things that has changed is the emphasis on the sustainability plan. So it used to be like, okay, what are you going to do when the project's over? Well, we'll apply for more grants, or we'll look for additional funding, or we'll just close doors and do something else. Okay. And, reviewers are like, well, that's not very exciting, but okay. The fact of the matter is, once the project's over, you really can't be held responsible for what happens next. Well, that's changed. The entire funding landscape has changed relative to sustainability plans, and I think overall it's a pretty good change. So if I'm your reviewer and you've convinced me that you have a real need for the funds, that you have a real problem that absolutely must be solved, then I become emotionally invested in that problem, in that need you're trying to resolve. So when the funding is over, I don't want to leave people hanging. I don't want to leave this need unresolved at the end of the day. Right? I want to know that there's something in place that will continue the benefits that you are providing through your grant funded project. What's going to happen next? I may not be able to hold you accountable for it, but I want to know that by the time the last dollar has been spent, there are sufficient processes and organizations and products and services in place that the need you have identified will continue to be addressed in the long term. So what are you going to do to make that happen? So one of the things that we see in a winning characteristic for proposals is you have a next steps plans. At the end of the day, here's how we're going to be able to continue the benefits that we have begun during the grant funded period. So this is the whole set. Every winning proposal is going to address these. Now, obviously there are strategies to do each of these pieces here that we'll get into when we start to focus on them individually, but overall you really have to think about what it is that you're putting into your proposals, what it is that structures your proposals, what's in there, what are you trying to communicate to the reviewer, what's the overall message. And the overall message needs to reflect these items here if you want to have the opportunity to receive those grant funds and solve problems. So it's very important. So we'll keep those in mind, and we'll continue to reflect back on these items here as we get later into the series. So that's the 10,000 foot view, and in each of the next parts of this series, we're going to look very specifically at tools and strategies and techniques that will help you to address these winning characteristics here. You know, everything from how do you identify your need and quantify and communicate it, how do you develop the sufficient and necessary budget, how do you communicate it. We're going to look at designing an effective evaluation plan. How do you actually communicate your objectives and the means with which you will determine progress towards meeting them. We'll look at all of that. We'll look at packaging, and at the end of the day, we'll look at actually writing. Because one of the principles that I use to approach the grant writing process is we've got to do all the legwork first. We've got to do the research. We've got to do all the planning. We have to do all the budget work and all that stuff first. And then once that is done, then we are ready to begin writing. But a grant proposal is a communication document. You're taking all the stuff that you've done in preparation, you're packaging it together in writing, and you're communicating it to the reviewers in a clear, concise, and compelling manner. Well, it turns out I've got a series of strategies that help you do that also, that actually look at how do you write about what you're going to do in a manner that the reviewer will be able to understand, in a manner that will convince your reviewer that you are the appropriate organization, the appropriate person to receive those grant dollars. So we'll look at that as well finally. And then packaging, we'll look at packaging, we'll look at submitting, and then we'll look at next steps. What do you do after you've submitted? What do you do with reviewers' comments? And what do you do when you actually get funded? So all of that is coming up. So I hope you join me for that. You know, I've got 24 years of experience, and I've got a lot to share with you. And I will refer back to the thing I started with, the concept I started with at the beginning, which is if you have a real need for funding, then you deserve to get that funding. And what I'm going to share with you throughout this series are going to be the strategies that will help you get the funding you deserve. So thank you very much for watching this first part of the overall series. I think you're going to find it all very useful to you. So so I look forward to sharing these ideas with you, and I wish you the very best of success with all of your grant proposals. Thank you again. My name is David Bowman with Audacious Leaders in Education. Thank you.